What's up, War Room? We are back with another weekly video before we record our weekly pod, the appetizer, if you will. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso, joined as always by Connor Rodgers, post-Memorial Day, post-getting away for a couple days, and locked and loaded with a bunch of different things we're going to cover between both episodes we're recording. Connor, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm good, man. You come off Memorial Day weekend and you're a little slow moving, but it's good to be back in the swing of things. It's summer, so nothing that crazy anyway. I've been grinding Broncos run game film this morning for Nathaniel Hackett because I've decided for the Joe Tippmann film room, I kind of want to incorporate some of the things that Hackett tried. I know people laugh at Hackett with the Broncos, but the guy has still called offense for a long time. So some of the things that they wanted to do in the run game before Javonte Williams got hurt and how Tippmann factors into that. So that's how you know it's like at late May, early June. Like you're in the real depths of making content, which I personally like, and I know our subscribers do. That's why there are subscribers, but it is a very funny thing to be doing. Not really one you could explain to your significant other. Let me say that.
I mean, listen, who doesn't spend late May watching Broncos run game tape from a team that had a very memorable, successful season last year to get ready for the Jets' new offensive coordinator, who we already given a great nickname to. So we love the content grind here. As you can see, we haven't slowed down. Honestly, there's been a lot to talk about. We haven't had to reach, which is nice. So what we're going to do this week is we got a lot of great questions in the Discord. We're going to answer most of them in the pod. We're going to treat it like a mailbag episode and remind the people who haven't been as smart as the War Room people that if they join War Room, they can get their questions answered with much more regularity. So if you don't hear your question answered in the video, highly likely we're answering it in the pod, or we'll just respond to you guys via text as we always do in the Discord chat. 3 things I want to cover today. One, we got a great question from Michael Sen, nostalgia related about 2002 and 2004. We're going to hit on at the top. We got a quick question about Becton, which we're going to answer in the middle part quickly. And then last but not least, Joe Douglas was ranked as the 15th best GM in the NFL by Roto World, who does a great job with their weekly overall rankings every year. They've been doing this for a while. And Douglas came in 15th, which sounds about right, but we'll talk about that more. So the question from Michael was sort of a riff on, we said that the Jets generally have very rarely had expectations to be good and then actually been good. It usually comes as a surprise. When they are bad, it's happened in times when we thought there might be decent. There were some expectations around 2016 and they were a letdown. 2011, a letdown, maybe to an extent, 2012, a letdown. I think he correctly called out that the 2004 team was supposed to be pretty good and were pretty good and probably should have made the AFC Championship game. And the 2002 team, which is the team that was the Pennington blaze of glory year when he was the best quarterback in the NFL for 12 weeks until they ran into the Raiders buzzsaw. That team, if you forget, they made the playoffs in 2001 with Vinny at quarterback. They made it on that John Hall kick the last week, and then they lost to the Raiders the following week in a pretty competitive game. So there were playoff expectations. It just wasn't around Pennington and going 9-7 on this huge winning streak and winning the division for the last time they won the division, which we're hopefully going to break that streak. We've talked a little 2004 here, not a ton of 2002. For me, I think it was a good point by Michael, because the more I thought about it and the more I researched and jogged my memory, I was a junior in high school in 2004. And that team actually did have some decent expectations. I think a lot of people threw away 2003 because of injuries and had seen the Jets have success with Pennington and Herm and Curtis Martin and the offensive line. And that team, I always say, gets lost in the shuffle, but were good right from the jump. They started 5-0. They lost a really close game to New England and were consistently well over 500. They were in the playoffs without needing to win the last game of the year. So I think they kind of ended up punting most of that game. And even though they had to go on the road, they beat the Chargers with that famous Pennington pass to Santana Moss, and were in position to beat a Pittsburgh team that I think was 15-1 that year. And they had the game. They just kind of gave it away with bad clock management and Doug Bryan. I don't want to rip the wound open. Before we quickly hit on 2002, which I would say was even a more fun season, even though the 2004 team was probably better from start to finish. You're a couple years younger than me. What do you remember about that year and following the team at that stage of your fandom?
Right. So these kind of mesh together a little bit. I was pretty young. I think in 2002, I was 11. And then 2004, I mean, just 2 years later, I was, just becoming a teenager. So I remember Pennington, notably, obviously, in '02, being really, really good. And when you go back and look, he actually led the NFL in passer rating that year. He had 104.2. Nobody had over 100 in passer rating. 2004, I remember being, I feel like it was more of a surprise, if I have that right, with the 2004 Jets. And you would know better than me, Joe.
It was a
And
surprise, like how hot they started. No one thought they'd start like 5-0.
yeah, I think that's a better way to put it. They had the hot start. They were a team. Obviously, I feel like they were more of a defensive team because you had Pennington that year being very, very like all-time game manager Pennington. I mean, that year in 2004, Pennington threw 16 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He had 7.2 yards per attempt. What I oddly remember more of that year is them having to have Quincy Carter get them through a little bit of a stretch too. If I have that
Yeah.
right, that was the Quincy year, right? And
There's a little bit of a QB controversy for like a hot second there because Carter could do one thing well, bomb the ball down the field.
right.
And I remember
That was in Pennington's game.
Yeah, and they had Santana Moss, and I think Carter on the whole was not great, but he did have like, I want to say he had like a 70-yard touchdown bomb to Santana Moss, and everyone's like, wow, imagine what this offense could be if you had him.
Right.
And of course, it didn't work out. They went back to Pennington.
Well, 2004 also was the weird year where 31-year-old Curtis Martin just went bonkers
His
too.
best year of his career, arguably.
Which is, yeah, I would think so. I mean, by almost every metric, efficiency, total yards. I think I want to make sure I had this right. He chipped in receiving, nothing crazy, but I mean, he had almost 1,700 rushing yards. 2004 was kind of my first real experience of a team I felt like of, okay, this team can just really have a bell cow running back and play defense under Herm, and the quarterback needs to just take care of the football and they'll grind out games. Like that's what I remember about that Jets team. And even when you look at, some of the wins that they had, I mean, they had some really, really tight wins. They would win games by a score basically all the time when you go back and look at how that team played. I mean, I know they had the one where they blew out Miami on Monday Night Football, but most of the time they were just grinding out games by playing defense and running the football. And then, of course, Santana Moss. I mean, at that age, that was like, that was the dude, right? That was like the guy. When you're a younger fan, you love the receivers, and he was an explosive wide receiving threat. I don't know. That team to me was a nice surprise, especially after you look at how 2003 went, of course.
Yeah, Moss was so much fun. He actually, I think statistically had like a crazier stretch in 2003 when they weren't that good. I think he scored a touchdown like 8 straight weeks or something, and some of them were like ridiculous. I think he had
when they
3
had to
touchdowns.
call back Vinny, right? That was when Vinny had to come back.
No,
yeah.
I think that was 2005, which was very.
Oh, Vinny came back in 05. That's right. Yeah, that's a weird Jets tenure. Really weird Jets tenure.
They used to have this thing where they were bad every other year. They were like, so they were good in 2002, bad in 2003, good in 2004, bad in 2005, good in 2006, bad in 2007. Yeah. And then you basically got up to like, they were good in 2008, but of course flamed out. And then you had that championship runs, and here we are. But yeah, a kind of a familiar thing, right? Game management, running, defense. Pennington was a different player in 2002, and he was never the same after he got hurt in the preseason or whenever that main injury was in 2003. He was a different beast in 2002, and that is one of those rare stretches in Jets history where you're like, oh, wow, we have our franchise quarterback now. Yep. We have our guy who's going to be a Pro Bowler, and like he is the guy. And it's awesome that he was able to kind of rally back and have that like second chapter, even though it was with Miami, and he extended his career way longer than I think most people expected. But he was never quite the guy, or was never quite as exciting as it was in 2002. They were a legitimate buzzhogs. I think they started, I want to say like 1-3 or something, and finished 9-7. They like just did not lose. They lost to the Raiders in the regular season, and they lost in the divisional round to the Raiders. That was like the only team who could beat them. And that was the team who blew the doors off the Packers at home to make the playoffs, and then blew the doors off the Colts at home with Peyton Manning. So when you win back-to-back games like that, winning in and in the playoffs, you're like, oh, wow, like this could really be a Super Bowl team. And that's why there were still a little remnant expectations for 2004. But Herman, Pennington, I think were good and sometimes get a little too much hate retroactively, but not quite great and not good enough. Their limitations ultimately held them back along with Doug Bryan in that Steelers game. That team also, I think, I always say that the 2000, a lot of Jet fans say this, the Jets, if they got the ball back against the Steelers in 2010, would have went down the field and would have won the game. And they were good enough to win that game. They just sleptwalk in the first quarter. Shout out Rashad Mendenhall. This just makes me sick. That 2014 wasn't going into New England and winning. That I just did that. I don't think that was the year for that to happen to them, even if they did beat Pittsburgh. So that's why the Doug Bryan kicks don't kill me quite as much. There's your prompted Discord nostalgia of the week, which we'll hit a lot on over the summer because when the season gets here, we're going to have to talk about the Jets winning in primetime every single week. So we can only riff about Rashad Mendenhall and old Jet team so much.
I mean, 0-2 Pennington, though, like that's the one that breaks my heart because that was the one where I remember it was so exciting to me when I saw how excited my dad was, because I was like, when you're a kid, you're just like, oh, like when I grew up, and you and I often talk about this, it's very weird for the younger Jets fans that listen to our content now. When we were growing up, I was born in 91. So what I remember is really like 98 and on, even though I was in the stands for preseason games before I could like barely walk. The Jets were good or competitive. Like the Jets were very respectable. They were competitive. It's a different era than I think the fans maybe 10 years before me and 10 years after me experienced. So I don't, the old, LOL Jets, like, but I remember my dad, who loves college football, so he really loved Pennington, even when he was playing at Marshall. He was like, this was a big deal. When Pennington was that good, it was like, holy shit, like, we have a franchise quarterback. He's really, really good. He's insanely smart. He won't make any mistakes. Before he got hurt, he had all the talent to be, very effective at all levels of the field. It was a really, really big deal. And it was catastrophic how things eventually went injury-wise.
Yeah, the crowds those years down the stretch, you could feel it from that other generation of Jet fans. Like, oh, we have something special here. And that was the year he had the juke move for the touchdown against the Bills. I was at that game, and the reaction and the like jubilation of having a quarterback who was consistently being the best quarterback on the field every week in every game he was playing was such a foreign thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you had the stretch of it in 98, but that was a one-year flash in the pan with Vinny. And a kind of similar thing. He didn't begin the year as a starter. Glenn Foley did, and he came in and he was like awesome for this like stretch of a season. And then it was like over because he got hurt in 99. It was almost the exact same thing that happened with Pennington, where he was awesome for this stretch of a season, got hurt at the beginning of 2003, and that was it. So it's tough. And you understand that from an older Jet fan being that excited about it. But there were a couple really fun moments in that 2002 season when it was all clicking together. So go back and check out some of those highlights.
Two weird things I always remember with Pennington that I might have taken for granted at the time, but it was one of those things I'd sit on the couch and my dad would explain to me. He had the best play action like aesthetic I've ever seen. Like it was beautiful. Literally poetry in motion. And two, this is something my dad always yelled about at the TV in a positive way. He always got them to the line of scrimmage to call out the protections, and they never got called for delay a game. And like, I don't know if that's maybe it's something like when you look back at the analytics, they did more than you remember. But when I think of all the young quarterbacks I've watched post Pennington, Sanchez, obviously, Geno, Darnold, Zach Wilson, tons of guys, even the bad ones that have played in between, even worse ones. Like those little things are a disaster routinely. And with Pennington, it was something where you wrote everything. And I'm sure the offensive lineman that played with him would say the same thing. It's something that you took for granted in that moment.
It's something that, we get traumatized by from watching recent Jets quarterbacks, and you take it for granted when you realize how awesome it was that he could do the little things well.
Finer points of the game. Yep.
The finer points of the game. Yes. 100%. All right. Pivoting to real time. We got a question from in the Discord about really straightforward, and we can keep this quick as it stands now. Now, Jets made another tackle addition today. I don't necessarily think this plays into it, but straight up, What do you think is the percent chance Mekhi Becton is on the week 1 roster at this point?
96, right? And I'm factoring in
that's higher than I would say. I was going to say like 60%.
This year?
Yeah, will Becton be on the Jets roster week 1?
Oh man, I number one, like he has no trade value. You'd be selling horrifically low. I guess if you bake in the fact that he can get hurt again this summer and go on the IR, not be on the 53 man, yeah, it's I'd put it at 85% because that's assuming he might not be able to get through camp. But I don't see how you could trade him. I don't see why you would trade him right now. He can complain through the press all he wants, but at the end of the day, if he wants to make a lot of money next year, he's got to go out there and ball out. I mean,
yep.
Like what is there to do? And my argument with the Becton thing is, say you traded him, right? Because you don't want to deal with the back and forth, and you got a 5th round pick that become a 4 if he starts 10 games. I'm just spitballing. I'm not going to worry about the nuances and details right now. Is that more valuable than him maybe playing a productive 7 to 10 games this year? I don't think so. I really don't think so. So I think he's here unless he just gets hurt, which is obviously always the thing that we're fearing about. What led to you being a much lower than me?
I just wonder, and I still think it's more likely than not. I just think it's not in the 90 percentile.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere in the 60s.
Yeah, it's probably high.
I just wonder if the divide between him and the coaching staff is so much that at a certain point they're like, we're done with it. Even if we had to trade him for like light value. I mean, this is a team that was able to trade Blake Cashman. I think they could find a way to get him for a day 3 pick if they have to. And I'm not advocating for that. I think he's too much talent for their overall tackle position right now to move off of. I just wonder if it comes to a head where he's like, I'm only playing left tackle. And they're like, all right, like Dwayne Brown is going to be the left tackle. We're going to get Carter Warren some reps at left tackle. They just signed Kajus, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, from the Pats, who played a little left tackle last year. Billy Turner's played both sides. You have Max Mitchell's still. They keep adding these veteran tackles. They added another one today. And I just wonder if he's like, I'm not going to compete at right tackle. And I hope he doesn't say that. I hope
that'd be pathetic if so.
Yeah, I hope he's open to getting out there wherever, if it just doesn't work. So I hope it doesn't go that route. Fair. And that's why I'm at like 35%. He's not on the team, but I won't lie that every time they do like add a Billy Turner, add a Kajus, that I'm like, I wonder if they're just like, hopefully they're just being extra cautious, but I also wonder if they're worried coming out of the article in the last couple of years that what if it just doesn't click in camp with the new offense and with the new coaching staff, and we got to protect ourselves. So hope that he is on the team. Hope that he's starting, because I think he's one of the 2 most talented tackles on the team. But we'll see. I do think it's a little more open-ended than we'd like it to be.
You hope that, one of the big benefits of Robert Saleh being here is that you could mend situations like that. And I've heard, and this is pretty public, but Hackett is very, very well liked, which by players, which also might be, Hackett might be able to go in there and repair a relationship and be like, listen, this is a fresh start for you, man. Like, this is what we want you to be. This is what we want you to do. So I'm not on red alert as much. I still think it was a very dumb thing to do, going to the press and speaking out like that at this point of the year. I'm not saying I'm always against players doing that. But you think that Hackett and Saleh having the reputation as players coaches, that if that's one of the benefits of you, then you should be able to fix a situation like this.
Yeah, you certainly hope so. That's what we're rooting for, and it's part of the reason why we like Robert Saleh a lot. That can you put the past in the past and just have it go forward? New offensive coaching staff, new system, new quarterback. Start fresh. Let the best players play in camp, and find a way to make it work, because this offense needs its most talented players on the field. Last one before we jump over to the pod. Roto World's rankings. Joe Douglas, number 15 in their GM list. He was 1 behind Chris Greer, 1 ahead of Jason Lick. So sort of like middle of the pack. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else of note who he was like behind or ahead. Either way, like generally
ahead of Joe Shane by a couple spots.
Yep.
Behind, Brad Holmes, the Cowboys group, Costa on the Ravens.
Yep.
Usual suspects.
It's I read this the summary, I think, is very similar to what we say a lot, that the Zach Wilson miss was really bad. There's been a couple really nice wins along with getting Rodgers here beyond Sauce, beyond Garrett Wilson, that has bought him a stay that usually GMs don't get when you miss on a GM at number 2. But that this is the season of, you can't go 8-9. You have to make the playoffs and do something of consequence, or he could be out of a job. So I think 15 is about right. I think Jet fans who say he's top 10 have always been too kind to him. I think Jets fans who have said he's bottom 5 or bottom 10 have been too harsh on him. I think, as usual, the truth generally lies in the middle, and putting him about middle of the pack seems really fair, especially for a guy who, you know, his record on paper, you'd be like, oh, wow, that's like a high ranking for a guy who's has his winning percentage, which we know is really ugly, but we also know that there's some context that goes to it. So it's not 100% on him. But I think considering what that record is, and considering, even if you count the half year, don't count the half year, how long he's been here, I think 15 is fair. And I think if they go out and this Rodgers trade works and they win the AFC East and they make noise in the playoffs, I think then you're talking about a top 7 to 10 GM. If you,
it's a top 10.
You get those wins under your belt. You have a good draft class this year. Maybe McDonald's better than most people expect. Maybe Tittman could start from day one. Maybe Izzy's like a revelation early in the year instead of Brees. You have another draft class that you feel good about to go with the one you feel great about, because the rest of it's kind of iffy. I think then it's a different kind of conversation.
I'm with you. Number one, I read the write-up. This is from Roto Pat, who does an incredible job. I'm fortunate enough to work with him at NBC. And I honestly looked at this and I was like, this is almost exactly what I would write and where I rank him, which is, you don't want to say like, that's a great reason why it's really good. Cause I agree. That's bad thinking in sports too often, but I thought it was really well laid out. I mean, what Roto Pat essentially said was that, you know, he had a killer 2022 when he got Sauce and Garrett Wilson and they won the Rookie of the Year awards. The Zach Wilson pick is one of the biggest NFL disasters of the last 5 years that would have doomed a lot of front offices. That's his exact words here. And he said it's a miracle that it didn't, but it shows that they are being patient with Douglas and that he has hit on certain areas. And, you know, they got Saleh and Rodgers after coming into a situation with Gase and Darnold. And now it's put up or shut up, really. It's really that simple. Like, if the Jets don't make the playoffs, if the Jets aren't over 500, there's going to be serious conversations to be had, as there should be. But as it looks right now, 15, like, he's a middle of the pack GM right now. I think why the discussion is so fascinating of him being a middle of the pack GM is because almost none of his moves have been middle of the pack moves. The variance
extremes.
It's only extremes. It's both ends of the spectrum. So that's why when you say he's middle of the pack or he's really good or he's really bad, there's a side or two sides. When you say he's middle of the pack, both sides usually come for your head, that want blood because they don't. But when you look at it, I mean, number one, right? And I get it, but they didn't build around Darnold and they traded him. Okay. You get your own swing at a quarterback. It was Zach Wilson. It didn't work at all. And now you're getting technically a third swing, but like really your second real swing in Rodgers, which we love. Great move. You hired Robert Saleh, which I liked a lot. I know you did too, Joe. You've had some really, really good picks. If Becton is like a total 0 this year and Mims obviously gets cut and this draft class doesn't do a lot, it's going to be really fascinating to see the entire picture. But it's Elijah Moore, like quietly a really, really bad situation, you know? So, because that was one where they kind of puffed their chest out and said, this guy got a red star. He's an amazing character. And he was traded because of his character. So,
how the story changes in 12 months.
Yeah, there's certain things that you shouldn't leak to the media. So I agree with this. Like, I don't think Douglas has been bad. I don't think he's been really good. I think he just has had extreme hits and extreme misses. And at some point, you do need to be a little bit more in the middle. And hopefully, if Rodgers is here for 2 years, that the remaining moves will be more in the middle. Like DJ Reed's maybe another extreme because he was so good last year, but I'll call it one of the ones more closer to the middle where it's like, it's a really nice free agency signing. You know, maybe a couple steps lower, but a couple more like that. rather than, you don't need to get maybe we could be a generational corner in Sauce Gardner every draft, but you also can't miss in the first round all the time in the top 12. So yeah, he's a fascinating discussion because he's had a lot of extremes. And if he gets himself closer to the middle going forward, he'll be here a long time.
100%. So I think fair ranking, and we'll know more as we get closer to the season and we see how the season plays out. All right, War Room, we appreciate the discourse as always. Video live tonight, Tuesday, pod live tomorrow morning. Keep the questions coming. Look out for a couple new videos, episodes, features. Tippmann, the next film breakdown coming.
Oh, yeah.
So we will talk to you soon. Thank you.